The ladder wobbled. I grabbed the gutter, my knuckles scraping against the aluminum, and steadied myself. "You're getting too old for this, Frank," I muttered, my breath pluming in the crisp Saturday after Thanksgiving air. In my left hand, I held a string of C9 Christmas bulbs. Not the new-fangled pinprick LED things that looked like a swarm of angry, anemic fireflies. No, these were the real deal. The big, old-fashioned, incandescent bulbs that get warm to the touch and glow with the kind of deep, nostalgic color that reminds you of spiked eggnog and A Christmas Story marathons. The glass was thick, the colors were rich. Red, green, blue, orange, white. This was the one box of decorations that had survived my last move, a sacred relic from a simpler time. I was clipping the last bulb onto the gutter line, feeling a genuine, uncomplicated kernel of holiday joy when I felt it. The stare. You know the one. That pins and needles feeling on the back of your neck. I glanced down, over my shoulder, and there she was, Brenda. She was standing on the sidewalk across the street, motionless, next to her perfectly manicured and HOA-approved boxwood shrubs. She wasn't just getting her mail. She wasn't walking her yapping abomination of a dog. She was watching me. And she was holding a clipboard. A clipboard. On a Saturday. At 4:30 p.m. "Oh, for the love of—" I sighed, clipping the final bulb in place. I gave the string a little jiggle, and the whole roofline lit up in a glorious, chaotic, multicolor blaze. It was beautiful. It was cheerful. It was Christmas. "Frank!" Her voice cut through the air like a frozen rake. I pretended not to hear, focusing on the very important task of not falling off the ladder. "Frank!" This time she was at the foot of my driveway. I heard the crunch, crunch, crunch of her sensible shoes on my gravel walkway. I looked down. She had her disappointed face on, the one that said, "Your recycling bin contains non-recyclable items, and I am personally wounded by it." "Hey, Brenda. Getting in the spirit?" I said, forcing a smile. She looked up, shielding her eyes not from the sun, which was already setting, but from the sheer, unbridled joy of my C9 bulbs. "Those aren't on the approved list," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a verdict. I blinked. "What list, Brenda?" "They're Christmas lights, you know, for Christmas." "Section 8, Article 4 of the Crestwood Commons Homeowners Association bylaws," she recited as if it were scripture. "I have a copy right here." She actually tapped the clipboard. "All seasonal illuminations must be of a warm white, single-color palette, preferably LEDs to maintain visual harmony." I stared at her. "Visual harmony? Brenda, it's Christmas. It's supposed to be a little unharmonious. It's festive." "Your lights," she said, looking back up at them with a physical wince, "are chaotic." Chaotic. That was the word she used. My cheerful, nostalgic, big-bulbed symbols of peace on earth and goodwill toward men were chaotic. "Well, I like 'em," I said, my grip tightening on the ladder. "And I'm pretty sure half the neighborhood still uses these." "Half the neighborhood," she said, making a little ticking noise with her pen against the clipboard, "will also be receiving a rectification notice. You have 24 hours to remove them and comply with the warm white standard." "Or what?" I said. The jovial feeling was gone, replaced by a cold prickle. "Or," she said, giving a tight, triumphant little smile, "a fine will be issued, $150, and it doubles every 48 hours of non-compliance. Good evening, Frank. Do try to be harmonious." She turned, her back ramrod straight, and crunched her way back across the street. I stood there on the ladder, in the gathering dark, staring at my beautiful, chaotic lights. I scoffed. She's bluffing. She wouldn't dare. I was wrong. The next afternoon, I went out to get the mail. Taped squarely to the center of my front door, flapping in the breeze, was a crisp, cream-colored envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Violation notice. Crestwood Commons. HOA violation. Section 8. Article 4. Improper and non-harmonious holiday illuminations. Non-compliant color palette. Chaotic multi. Fine. $150. Due in 30 days. Rectification. Immediate removal and replacement with approved warm white illuminations. We're all in this together, Frank. Let's keep Crestwood harmonious. The little handwritten Frank and the smiley face next to it were somehow the worst part. I crumpled the notice in my fist. Harmonious, I whispered. Oh, I'll give you harmonious. I'll give you so much harmony you won't know what hit you. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept seeing that smug little smiley face. I kept hearing that word, chaotic. I'm a reasonable guy. I really am. I'm a graphic designer. I work from home. I pay my taxes. I trim my hedges. I even separate my plastics and my paper. But there's something about the sheer, unadulterated, petty tyranny of an HOA that can take a mild-mannered man and turn him into a revolutionary. The next morning, I made coffee, strong, black, and bitter, and marched into my home office. On the bottom shelf of my bookshelf, gathering dust, was the Welcome to the Neighborhood packet. Inside it, bound in a 3-ring binder so thick it could stop a small-caliber bullet, were the Crestwood Commons Homeowners Association covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CCNRs, the bylaws, Brenda's Bible. I slapped it on my desk, sending up a puff of dust. All right, you miserable brick of legalese, I muttered. Let's dance. I spent the next 3 hours reading. It was a journey into a world of pure madness. I learned that my mailbox had to be Benjamin Moore, black semi-gloss, Article 4, Section 2. I learned that my garage door could not be open for more than 60 consecutive minutes unless active ingress or egress of a vehicle is in progress. Article 6, Section 9. I learned that any statuette, gnome, or artificial fauna was strictly prohibited. Article 7, Section 3. It was a masterpiece of soul-crushing minutiae. And then, I found it. Section 8. Seasonal and holiday displays. I read Article 4 slowly, my blood pressure rising with every word. All seasonal illuminations affixed to the exterior of a dwelling must be of a warm white, single color palette, defined as 2700 K, 3000 K on the Kelvin scale. This is to ensure visual harmony and prevent aesthetic discord. Aesthetic discord, I grumbled. Who writes this stuff? Satan? I kept reading, expecting to find a catch-all phrase, the "we can fine you for anything we don't like" clause. But instead, the authors of this suburban nightmare pact had gotten specific. It was their fatal flaw. The bylaw went on to explicitly ban multicolor bulbs, see chaotic multi-classification. It banned cool white bulbs, defined as 4000 K or higher. It banned blinking, strobing, chasing, or otherwise animated lights. It banned any inflatable figures exceeding 4 feet in height. It banned projector-style lights that cast images onto the dwelling. I read the list 3 times. My designer brain, the one I use to find creative solutions for demanding clients, started to whir. It was like a rusty old engine shuddering to life. They had defined the color of the light output. They had defined the behavior of the light. They had banned inflatables and projectors. But they hadn't said a word about wavelength. They hadn't said a word about the source of the light, only its color. What if the light source had no visible color? A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. "Okay," I said to my empty office. "They don't want multicolor. They don't want cool white. They only want warm white light." I spun around in my chair and typed into my browser. HOA lighting, loopholes, creative malicious compliance. Christmas ways to annoy HOA legally. The search results were amusing. People who put up one single pathetic light. People who spelled out "find" in warm white bulbs. Amateurs. Then I had the spark. The real spark. I opened a new tab. High-powered UV blacklights, invisible UV reactive paint. "Oh my," I whispered. "Oh my, yes." The rules banned colored lights. They banned projected images. They didn't say a thing about painting my house with an invisible UV reactive mural. And they didn't say a thing about illuminating that mural with lights that exist outside the visible spectrum. The lights themselves wouldn't be warm white or cool white or multicolor. They would be purple. A deep, weird, non-holiday specific purple. But more importantly, the light itself wasn't the decoration. The paint was. "It's not a light, Brenda," I practiced saying, pointing an imaginary finger at the ceiling. "It's art. And my lights? They're just ambient. Very, very ambient." A cackle escaped my throat. It was a rusty, unused sound. I was going to follow her rules. I was going to follow them so hard. Brenda wanted a single-color palette? Fine. The palette would be invisible. She wanted visual harmony? Fine. By day, my house would be the most harmonious house on the block. It would be a blank, beige canvas of pure, unadulterated compliance. But by night, her aesthetic discord was going to get a whole new definition. I pulled out my credit card. I started with a search for theatrical supply and escape room design. I wasn't going to get what I needed from Home Depot. This wasn't a job for a string of party store bulbs. This was a job for cannons. This was war. A very, very harmonious war. My initial plan to just order a few blacklight tubes online quickly felt inadequate. Fining me $150 for C9 bulbs wasn't just a violation. It was an escalation. And in the art of petty war, you must always, always meet escalation with overwhelming, disproportionate force. I needed a professional. I needed someone who didn't just understand lighting. I needed someone who understood theater. My search for theatrical lighting led me down a rabbit hole of stage rigging companies and DJ suppliers. Finally, I found a local company with a promisingly vague name, Spectral Solutions. Their website looked like it was designed in 1998, all flashing text and grainy photos of fog machines. It was perfect. I called the number. A gravelly voice answered on the 3rd ring. "Spectral, you found us. What's the gig?" Hi," I said, feeling suddenly like a kid ordering fireworks from the back of a comic book. I have a unique residential lighting project. Kid's birthday? The voice grunted. Man cave? We don't do grow-ups, so if that's what this is, HOA revenge, I said. There was a long, profound silence on the other end of the line. I could hear what sounded like a rock and roll guitar solo playing faintly in the background. Then, a low, delighted chuckle. Say no more. I'll be there in 45 minutes. What's the address? True to his word, 44 minutes later, a van that looked like it had been the sole survivor of a Mad Max movie pulled up to my curb. The side was emblazoned with a peeling logo of a prism shooting lasers. A man who looked like he was built entirely of tattoos, black t-shirts, and electrical tape hopped out. He was probably in his late 50s, with a long, graying ponytail and an energy that buzzed. He walked right up to my front door, ignoring the fine still taped to it, and extended a calloused hand. Sparks, he said. So, which one of the beige tyrants are we lighting up? We're lighting this one up, I said, pointing to my own house. And we're doing it subtly. I invited him in. I skipped the coffee and offered him a beer, which he accepted. We sat at my kitchen table, the crumpled fine notice between us. So, Heat said, taking a pull from the bottle. She hit you with the warm white clause, eh? She called my C9s chaotic. Sparks winced. Oof, chaotic. That's rough. That's Brenda, right? Across the street, the one with the clipboard? You know her? Kid, I've been doing light and sound in this county for 30 years, Sparks said. I know all the Brendas. I did a Halloween setup for a guy in Ashworth Creek 3 years ago. We had a skeletal projection climbing the house. She got that shut down in an hour. Said it implied structural instability. So, what's the plan? We talking a single high-powered spot? On her bedroom window? I was thinking bigger, I said, and more compliant. I laid out the plan, the bylaws, the loopholes, the high-powered UV lights, the invisible UV reactive paint. Sparks listened intently, his expression growing more and more serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fine notice. He took another sip of beer. Frank, he said, setting the bottle down with a clink. I've been in this business a long time. I've lit up Kiss cover bands. I've done fog for high school productions of Hamlet. I once built a 20-foot volcano for a bar mitzvah. He leaned in, a wild, beautiful grin spreading across his face. This, he said, is the single greatest idea I have ever heard. He wasn't just in, he was invested. Okay, here's the deal, he said, switching into professional mode. Your idea is good, but you're thinking too small. You're thinking about those little party store screw-in bulbs. You do that, you'll get a dim, blotchy purple. It'll look sad. Brenda will win. So what do we do? I asked. We go pro, he said. He pulled a worn notepad from his back pocket. You don't want bulbs, you want cannons. 4 of them. We'll use 400-watt, high-output UV flood fixtures, the kind they use in theme parks to make the rides glow. We'll mount 2 on the corners of your roof, angled down, and 2 hidden in the bushes, angled up. We'll get full total 395 nanometer coverage. There won't be a square inch of this house that isn't saturated in glorious, invisible light. Cannons, I repeated, tasting the word. I like cannons. We'll wire it to a single discrete switch in your garage. And, he said, his eyes gleaming, we'll put the whole system on a digital timer. Set it to on at 5:30 p.m., off at midnight. Every single day. How much are we talking? For a standard gig? $1,000 easy for this? He tapped the fine notice. "For this noble F-in cause, I'll do it for parts and a case of that beer." We shook on it. Sparks was a man of action. He and his two-man crew, who introduced themselves only as Clutch and Feedback, were at my house the next day. Brenda, of course, was watching. As they started mounting the dark, inert-looking fixtures to my eaves, she marched right over. "Frank!" she called out. "What is this?" Sparks intercepted her before she even hit the driveway. "Ma'am, Sparks, Spectral Solutions. We're installing Mr. Hallowell's new security lights." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Security lights? Those are also regulated. Section 9, Article 2. They cannot be aimed in a way that causes glare or light spillage onto adjacent properties." Sparks gave her $1 million smile. "You don't have to worry about that, ma'am. These are state-of-the-art ambient mood lights. Very harmonious. You won't even know they're on. Promise." He said harmonious with such a straight face that I almost choked. Brenda looked unconvinced, but security and ambient were words she couldn't immediately fight. She made a note on her clipboard, "Investigate mood lights," and retreated. While they worked, I went on my own supply run. I was in charge of the art. I found an online theatrical supplier and ordered gallons of invisible UV-reactive paint. Not just one color. Oh no, I got screaming neon pink, electric slime green, psychedelic orange, and blazing yellow. By day, they were a milky, translucent white that would dry clear. By night, they would be anything but. The installation took 2 days. When Sparks and his crew were done, the house looked exactly the same. 4 black, unobtrusive fixtures were tucked away, invisible unless you were looking for them. Sparks met me in the garage. He'd installed a single, heavy-duty switch on the wall, the kind that makes a very satisfying thunk. "She's all yours, Captain," he said. "The timer's set, but I figured you'd want the manual override." "It's beautiful, Sparks," I said. "Just do me a favor," he said, packing his tools. When you flip the switch, text me. I want to be parked around the corner." The lights were in. The paint had arrived in 2 large, discreetly labeled brown boxes. The trap was set. Now I had to paint the bait. This, I realized, was the trickiest part of the operation. I couldn't paint during the day. Brenda had eyes like a hawk, and even if the paint dried clear, it went on milky. She'd see me up on the ladder, painting. Nothing. She'd have me on a vandalism of one's own property charge before the paint was even tacky. No, this had to be a night job. I waited until 1:00 a.m. on Thursday. The neighborhood was dead. The only light was the harmonious glow of the HOA-approved streetlights. I'd left the 150th fine taped to my front door. It fluttered in the late November wind, a little white flag of defiance. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to know I had received her gift and was, as of yet, non-compliant. I suited up. Black hoodie, black jeans, black gloves. I felt less like a homeowner and more like a second-story man. I opened the first can of paint, screaming neon pink. It had the consistency of thin yogurt and no smell. I poured it into a paint tray. "Here goes nothing," I whispered, and dipped my roller. I started on the garage door. The outline said, "Happy Holidays." Was going to deliver. I painted it in 6-foot-tall, dripping horror movie font letters. The milky paint was almost invisible against the beige of the garage, but in the faint moonlight I could just make out the wet sheen. It felt insane. I was a 40-year-old graphic designer, painting my own house with invisible ink at 1 a.m. It was, by a wide margin, the most alive I'd felt all year. A car turned onto the street. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pressed myself flat against the garage, the paint-filled roller held aloft like a useless weapon. The headlights swept across my yard. I held my breath. It was a newspaper delivery car. It slowed. The driver tossed a paper onto my neighbor's lawn and then drove on, oblivious. I let out my breath in a shaky plume. "Right," I muttered. "Focus, Frank." I finished the garage and moved on. I got out the extension ladder, up to the roofline. Where my beautiful, chaotic scene neons had once hung, I painted giant, 10-foot-tall candy canes, alternating stripes of screaming neon pink and electric slime green. I painted massive, intricate snowflakes on the second-story shutters, each one a unique, psychedelic orange nightmare. I got creative. I painted a full-sized sleigh on the roof, complete with 8 blazing yellow reindeer. They looked less like reindeer and more like radioactive mutant coyotes. But I was proud of them. I painted the trim, I painted the downspouts, I painted the concrete walkway with giant, green, elf-sized footprints leading up to the front door. I was in the zone. I was Michelangelo, and this beige box was my Sistine Chapel. Then I had my masterpiece. I went to the front door. The fine was still there. I carefully untaped it. Underneath, right on the door panel, I painted a giant 2-foot-tall hand, giving the middle finger. I painted it in electric slime green. I waited for it to dry. It was surprisingly fast drying, and then I carefully re-taped the $150. Fine right over the palm. The finger would be perfectly hidden behind the notice, invisible to the world. A little secret, just for me. I finished at 4:30 a.m. I was exhausted, covered in invisible paint, and happier than I had been in years. I cleaned my brushes in the garage sink, hid the empty cans, and went to bed. The next day, Friday, I woke up late. I made my coffee and looked out the window. The house was perfect. It was beige. It was boring. It was harmonious. You couldn't see a single drop of my night's work. The mood lights were just inert black boxes tucked under the eaves. Brenda, I noticed, was also watching. She was standing at her picture window, clipboard in hand. She was looking at my house, then at my roofline. She was looking for the C9 bulbs. They were gone. She smiled. A tight, victorious, "I have restored harmony" smile. She probably thought I'd caved. She probably thought I was at Home Depot right now, buying 3,000K warm white bulbs, my tail between my legs. "Just wait," I said to my coffee mug. The day dragged. I tried to work, designing a logo for a new brand of organic dog food, but I couldn't focus. I kept checking the clock. 3:00 p.m. 4:00 p.m. Sparks texted me at 4:30. "It's showtime, kid. I'm parked on Juniper. Godspeed." At 5:00 p.m., the sun began to dip below the horizon. The harmonious streetlights flickered on. At 5:15 p.m., the sky was a deep, bruised purple. At 5:29 p.m., I was in my garage, hand on the heavy-duty switch. The timer was set for 5:30, but Sparks was right. This was a moment that demanded a manual touch. I heard the clack of Brenda's front door opening. I peeked through the garage window. She was walking out to her mailbox, probably to see if I'd left my fine payment in there. 5:29 and 58 seconds. She pulled her empty mail from the box. 5:29 and 59 seconds. She turned back toward her house, casting a smug, satisfied glance at my blank, compliant, defeated-looking home. 5:30, unquote. I grabbed the switch. Harmonious, I whispered. And I threw it. There was no sound. No pop, no fizzle. Just the heavy, satisfying thunk of the industrial-grade switch. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the four 400-watt UV cannons kicked in. It wasn't like turning on a light. It was like deleting the darkness. A silent, violent, purple-white, and eldritch blue glow erupted from my house. It was so powerful it instantly washed out the harmonious yellow of the streetlight. Brenda, who was halfway up her driveway, stopped dead. She put a hand to her chest, and the paint ignited. The 6-foot-tall, dripping letters on my garage exploded into view. "Happy Holidays!" screamed in a neon pink so bright it felt loud. The 10-foot-tall candy canes on the roofline flashed into existence, alternating stripes of toxic green and eye-watering pink. The psychedelic orange snowflakes on the shutters looked like radioactive portals. The sleigh and its 8 mutant coyote reindeer on the roof. Good Lord, the blazing yellow was so intense it looked like pure, solidified sunshine. The green elf prints on the walkway looked like a trail of spilled nuclear waste. My entire house, a moment ago a study in beige submission, was now a psychedelic nightmare. A monument to aesthetic discord. But that wasn't the best part. Oh no, the unintended consequences were the best part. Sparks hadn't just given me lights. He'd given me an ultraviolet interrogation lamp. The high-powered blacklights illuminated everything that wasn't beige. Every single piece of lint on my porch glowed like a tiny blue star. The dandelions on my lawn, which I had neglected to pull, they lit up like a field of tiny, ethereal ghosts. My neighbor's white picket fence, 30 feet away, was now glowing a bright, eerie lavender blue. And in the best moment of the entire night, my other neighbor's white toy poodle, Barnaby, who was out for his evening constitutional, trotted onto my lawn. The dog lit up. He went from being a white poodle to a glowing, violet demon hound. He yelped, confused as to why his own fur was suddenly so luminous, and bolted back to his owner, who screamed. Brenda just stood there. Her mouth was open. She was making a sound. It wasn't a word. It was a high-pitched, sputtering, inhuman shriek, like a teapot and a modem having a fight. What is that?" she finally managed to get out, pointing a trembling finger. "My eyes, it's indecent." A car that was driving down our street slowed to a crawl. Then it stopped. The driver just stared, his window down. Another car pulled up behind it and stopped. Within 5 minutes, the street was blocked. People were getting out of their cars. They were taking pictures. They were laughing. "Dude, it's like a rave!" some teenager yelled. Brenda seemed to snap out of her trance. Her horror was instantly replaced by pure, uncut rage. She fumbled for her phone. I saw her illuminated by the unholy glow of my house, her face a mask of purple fury, stabbing at the screen. "Yes, 911! I'd like to report a public nuisance, a chemical light display, a rave! He's burning my retinas! He's probably running a drug lab! Yes! Crestwood Commons! Send everyone!" I watched all this from the crack in my garage door. I looked at my handiwork. The house was glorious. It was horrifying. It was everything I'd dreamed of. Then I looked at my front door. The $150 fine notice was still taped there. In the overpowering UV light, the cream-colored paper glowed a dull, sickly purple. But the tape, the simple, clear plastic tape I'd used, was apparently UV reactive. It lit up like a neon blue picture frame. And behind the notice, where the paper was just thin enough, you could just make out the faint, ghostly green outline of a giant, defiant middle finger. I closed the garage door, walked into my kitchen, and started making a celebratory cup of cocoa. The police, I figured, would be here any minute. The cocoa was just getting hot when the official lights joined the party. Red and blue strobes cut through the purple haze in my living room, casting chaotic patterns on the walls. A sharp, authoritative rap, rap, rap echoed from the front door. I took a deep, calming breath. I put on my most non-threatening, confused homeowner face. I walked to the door, past the glowing spectral middle finger, and opened it. Standing on my glowing green footprint-covered porch were two police officers. The one in front was older, with a face that had seen way too many HOA disputes. His name tag read, Karyu M. The younger officer behind him looked, well, he looked like he was trying very hard not to laugh. His eyes were wide, taking in the radioactive candy canes and the glowing dandelions. "Evening, officers," I said, as pleasantly as I could. Officer Crum squinted, his face bathed in the neon pink light from my garage. "Sir, what am I looking at?" "Holiday decorations, officer," I said, giving a helpful little gesture to the roof. "Just getting in the spirit." "Spirit of what?" Crum muttered. "The Toxic Avenger?" "It's a public nuisance!" Brenda's voice. She was marching across my lawn, which was now full of parked cars and curious onlookers, her phone held up like she was filming a crime. "Officer, thank God you're here!" she yelled, stopping at the edge of the porch, which was glowing like the floor of a spaceship. "Arrest him! He's... Look at it! It's blinding! It's a chemical hazard! My eyes are burning!" Crum looked at her, then back at me. He looked at his partner. He looked at the glowing house. He let out a sigh so heavy it could have been registered by the U.S. Geological Survey. "Ma'am, please, calm down," Crum said, turning to her. "It's not a chemical hazard. It's Blacklights." "It's illegal," she insisted. "It's a rave. He's attracting elements." She gestured to the teenagers who were now doing TikTok dances on the sidewalk. Crum turned back to me. His face was all business, but his eyes were tired. "Sir, we got a call about a public nuisance. Disturbing the peace." "Disturbing the peace, officer?" I asked, genuinely confused. "They're not making any noise. They're not blinking or strobing. They're just on." "They are a visual disturbance," Brenda shrieked. "Section 8, the bylaws." Crum held up a hand. "Ma'am, I am not here to enforce your HOA bylaws. That's a civil matter." He looked back at me. "But she might have a point about the nuisance. This thing is incredibly bright, and it's purple. Very, very purple." "Is purple a crime, officer?" I asked politely. This was the moment. The legal showdown. "No, purple is not a crime," Crum said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "But public nuisance can be. Is there any way you could tone it down? Or aim them somewhere else?" "Well, officer," I said, "I'm just trying to be compliant. See, my HOA has some very specific rules about holiday lights. They're all in the bylaws. I can get you a copy." Crumb's partner audibly snorted, then disguised it as a cough. "Sir, I don't need to see the—" "No, really," I insisted. "It's important. The rules explicitly ban multicolor bulbs, cool white bulbs, and blinking lights. My C9s were deemed chaotic, so I had to find a compliant solution. These lights? They're not any of those things. They're ultraviolet. And that," I said, pointing to a giant green candy cane, "is just paint. The bylaws say nothing about paint. I'm just a guy following the rules." Crumb stared at me. He was connecting the dots. The $150 fine was still taped to my door, glowing under the UV. He saw it. His eyes flicked from the fine, to my face, to Brenda, who was practically vibrating with rage. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile twitched at the corner of Crumb's mouth. He'd seen it all, and this was new. He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, as I said, this is a civil matter. He's not breaking any city ordinances. His lights aren't strobing, they're not making noise, and they're not aimed at your windows. They're just ugly." "Ugly? It's a monstrosity." "That's a matter of opinion," Crumb said. "And it's not a police matter." He turned back to me. He lowered his voice, leaning in just a bit. "This is the best one I've seen all year," he muttered, so low only I could hear. "But listen, I'm going to have to ask you to turn them off. For tonight. Just for tonight. To disperse the crowd. It's becoming a traffic hazard." "Of course, officer," I said immediately. "I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'll turn them off right now. Just want to be cooperative." "Good man," he said, giving me a nod. He turned to the crowd. "All right, folks, show's over. Let's clear the street." Brenda looked like she was going to explode. "That's it? You're just leaving?" "Have a good night, ma'am," Crumb said, tipping his hat. He and his partner walked back to their car, the red and blue lights reflecting off my screaming pink garage. I went back to the garage, Brenda's furious glare boring into my back. I flipped the giant thunk switch. Instantly, the world returned to normal. The house was beige. The dandelions were just weeds. Barnaby the poodle was just white. The teenagers groaned in disappointment. Brenda stood there in the harmonious streetlight, fuming. I walked back to my front door, untaped the fine, and went inside. I knew I'd only won the battle. The war was coming. The next morning, it was as if nothing had happened. My house was the picture of beige compliance, but the silence from Brenda was deafening. I knew she wasn't just letting it go. She was reloading. The counterattack came at 9 a.m. It wasn't a piece of paper taped to my door. It was a certified letter, delivered by a mailman who averted his eyes. Emergency. Fine and cease and desist. Crestwood Commons. HOA violation. Creation of a public nuisance. Article 12, Section 1. And I had to read the next part twice. Violation. Unapproved spectral illumination. Article 8, Section 4, Addendum. Fine, $500,000. Due immediately. Rectification. Immediate and permanent removal of all unapproved UV or blacklight fixtures and chemical paint. They'd invented a rule. Unapproved spectral illumination. They'd literally just made it up. And Section 4 Addendum? I grabbed my bylaw binder. There was no addendum. But the letter wasn't just a fine. It was a summons. An emergency hearing of the Aesthetic Committee has been called for 7:00 p.m. this evening at the Community Center. Your attendance is mandatory. Mandatory, I scoffed. They were getting desperate. I spent the day preparing. I didn't call a lawyer, I just printed out Section 8, Article 4. I made copies. I highlighted the specific wording. I found the section in the bylaws about how new rules are made. It required a 30-day notice and a majority vote of all homeowners, not just the board. That evening, I put on a nice, collared shirt. I wanted to look reasonable. I walked to the community center, my highlighted papers in a neat manila folder. When I walked in, it was exactly as I'd pictured. A long, folding table. Brenda sat at the head, looking like a cut-rate dictator. The 3 other board members, a nervous-looking guy named Tom, a woman who always looked confused named Merrill, and a hard-faced man named Gary, sat beside her. They looked like hostages. "Frank," Brenda said, her voice flat and cold. "Thank you for coming. We are here to discuss the abomination." "Brenda, board members," I said, sitting down. "Happy to be here. I assume you mean my new, fully compliant holiday lighting?" Gary snorted. "You call that compliant? It's a public nuisance. It's trashy. It's attracting elements." "It's attracting teenagers, Gary," I said, "and they're just taking pictures." "It is a mockery of the rules, Frank." Brenda slammed her hand on the table. "A mockery, and we are not going to stand for it." "Brenda, I'm confused," I said, opening my folder. "I received this fine for unapproved spectral illumination, but I've reviewed my copy of the bylaws, and that rule, well, it doesn't seem to exist." Merrill, the confused one, started flipping through her own binder. It doesn't?" "No," I said. "And the fine also mentions an addendum. But as we all know, addendums require a 30-day notice to all homeowners and a majority vote. This emergency meeting doesn't quite meet that standard, does it?" Tom, the nervous one, started to sweat. "Well, Frank, the spirit of the rule." "I'm not interested in the spirit of the rule," I cut in, my voice calm and firm. "I'm interested in the letter of the rule. The one you wrote, the one you fined me $150 for violating." I slid the highlighted copies across the table. "Here's the rule I'm following. Section 8, Article 4. It bans multicolor, cool white, and blinking lights. My lights are none of those. They are ultraviolet, a wavelength, not a color. The bylaws also ban projector-style lights. These are floods, not projectors. The bylaws also say nothing about paint, invisible or otherwise." I leaned forward. "My display is 100% compliant with the rules as written. I took down my chaotic C9s as requested. I have rectified the original violation. This new fine is baseless, and frankly, it's harassment." The room was silent. Merrill was staring at the paper. Tom was staring at his hands. Gary was staring at Brenda. Brenda was purple. Her face was the exact shade of my house. "This is ridiculous," she finally sputtered. "You know what you're doing. You're a bylaw lawyer." "I'm just a homeowner, Brenda. A homeowner who reads. You can't fine me for a rule you just invented because you lost." I stood up. "So I will not be paying the $500 fine, and I will not be ceasing and desisting. My lights will be on tonight, from 5:30 p.m. to midnight, as is my right." I gathered my papers. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get home. It's almost showtime." I walked out of the room. I could feel their eyes on my back. I didn't hear a word until I was almost out the door. "This meeting is tabled," Brenda yelled, her voice cracking with rage. I smiled. Tabled was the sound of surrender. I got home at 6:45 p.m. The lights, of course, were already on. The timer had worked perfectly. My house was a beacon of glorious, spiteful purple and green chaos. A small, respectful crowd was already there. A few cars, a few families. People were taking photos, but they were staying off my lawn. Officer Crumb's patrol car was parked at the end of the street, just watching. He wasn't there to shut me down. He was there to run traffic control. The Glow House, as the local kids were calling it, was officially a town attraction. Brenda's house, I noted, was dark, not a single warm white light. She'd turned them all off. She couldn't stand to have her harmonious display exist in the same universe as my psychedelic masterpiece. It was a silent, bitter retreat. The lights stayed on. They stayed on every single night, from 5:30 p.m. to midnight. The HOA never sent another letter. The $500 fine was never mentioned again. They knew I had them. A few days before Christmas, I decided to add one final touch. I waited until 1 a.m., got out the electric slime green and a very small brush. I went to my mailbox, the one that was supposed to be Benjamin Moore, black, semi-gloss. I painted very carefully on the side facing the street, in small, neat letters, SEC 8, Art. 4. It was invisible by day, naturally, but at 5:30 p.m., when the cannons kicked on, it lit up, a glowing green testament to the power of reading the fine print. Sparks drove by a few days later, saw it, and sent me a text that just said, Legend. On Christmas Eve, I sat in my living room, the purple glow from outside casting weird shadows on the walls. I was watching the local news. They were doing their Weird and Wonderful Holiday Lights segment. And finally, the anchorwoman said, if you're in the Crestwood Commons area, you can't miss this. Homeowner Frank Hallowell has created what locals are calling the Glow House, using, well, we're not entirely sure. It's something. They showed helicopter footage of my house. It was a glorious neon beacon in a sea of beige. I sipped my cocoa, which had a little extra something in it this time. I looked out the window at the glowing pink, green, and orange. Harmonious, I said to myself, raising my mug. Perfectly, beautifully harmonious.